Tom's, a lot of questions have come up on the subject of lower entropy and evolution. Can you tell us what the relationship between these ideas are? How does love factor in to lowering entropy? How does it apply to evolution?
Okay, good question. Yes, I get that question quite often. Like, what does lower entropy have to do with love? And what does love and lower entropy have to do with evolution? And these are all entangled together. And the best way to describe the connection is to describe a scenario where you see how they all work together. And to do that, we're going to imagine two different communities of different kinds of individuals, different kinds of people. And first, let's imagine a community that is kind of based on caring for other, on love, on compassion. We had many communities like that, I guess in the early days, say, maybe a Quaker community that would have existed here, 200 years ago, where somebody's barn burns down and everybody else in the community all pitches in to help build another one for them, where they take care of each other's children, they educate, whoever has the skills adds the skills to the community, that sort of thing. Well, if you look at that as one extreme example, okay, then you see this kind of community would flourish if there was this fundamental support system of people for each other. It would grow if somebody came up with a really good idea. Oh, I've got a better way of, doing something, of farming, of getting the produce to market, of whatever, building houses. Then it would be shared, and everybody would have the better idea. And then somebody else would say, well, I could improve it. Terrific. And so on. This kind of community would build, would grow. The only limitation would be on its capability, the ideas it could have. That would be the only thing that would limit where it could go. Now, these are hypothetical communities. We're not going to take this example but so far. But then let's look on the other extreme, and that would be a community where all of the people are very self-focused. They're all self-centered. It's what about me? What's in it for me? If somebody has a good idea, then they keep it to themselves because that puts them ahead of the competition with others. So that becomes a secret, and they won't let anybody else know that. And then somebody else wants to steal that secret. So somebody else will be, trying to rifle through their things to get the secret. Or if they're too successful, somebody will just kill them and take their stuff. Because this is a society where, whoever's biggest and has the most might gets what they want. Because it's all about the individual. What about me? What can I get and how little do I have to give for it? Okay, now look at that society. How will they build? How will they grow? They won't grow very far. Because inasmuch as somebody succeeds, someone else wants to tear that down and take it for themselves. Somebody else feels jealous, or this is a society full of ego, full of fear, full of needs and desires are what's important there, and it's self-destructive. It's very hard to build that up. You build something up, and somebody will try to take it away from you, or you can't share it. So that society doesn't grow very well. It doesn't evolve very quickly. It doesn't evolve positively very quickly. It has those constraints. So now look at the two in terms of evolution. Now the first is going to evolve just as quickly as people can come up with good ideas and share them. It's going to change. It's going to find new ideas, new ways of doing things, because these people are open and caring about each other. The other one is not. So now that kind of takes the evolution in with this. So one group you can say is a group based on love, on caring. The other is a group based on fear. This is mine, and how am I going to keep it? How am I going to keep somebody else from taking it? Okay, so those two extremes. Now the only other thing we have to work into this is entropy. Well, which group has the higher or lower entropy? Where do you find order and cooperation and process that's helpful, that contributes. Well, obviously it's in this positive group. That's where the order is, that's where the structure is. They find something that works and they work it, and then they improve it, and then they expand, and they learn and they grow and their knowledge grows. This other group, it's really hard to construct anything. You build something up, somebody else wants to tear it down because they don't like you having more than them, or they want what you have, so they want to take it away from you. So there's constant warring, there's constant fighting, there's constant competition, one person trying to outdo, trying to get what the other one has. One person, wants to not just build a better product, so all of us will have a better product. They want to destroy their competition so that their product, does better. It's just a different mindset. So in this very self-centered group, you just have high entropy. Things are always being broken, things are always being stopped, good ideas get suppressed because the person with the power to suppress them doesn't want to have to compete with them. You see, so you have a very high entropy, slowly evolving or de-evolving group of people when they are self-centered or fearful, so when you have the opposite of love. On the other hand, you have a group founded in caring and in love and cooperation, and you get a group that evolves very quickly because every advance anywhere becomes an advance for everyone.
And this directly relates to the largest consciousness system as well.
Yeah.
This is the direct correlation between here and what is happening in the larger consciousness.
Yes, I just give these examples to show how love, entropy, and evolution, go together. Because people say, well, what does love have to do with lowering entropy? What's the connection between lowering entropy and love? I don't get that connection. Well, this little example shows you the connection. Love creates, love is not something that happens in a vacuum. Love is not something that's just a relationship of an individual with himself. Love is about the relationship of an individual with others. Love is about other, not about self. So love, just by its definition, has to do with relationship, with other, with community, with connection, how it interacts with other people. And an interaction based on love is low entropy, which means it's an organizing principle. It builds, it grows, it evolves. You see, so that's how these things go together. And on the other hand, you have the fear, and fear is a disorganizing principle. Fear is a destructive. Fear tears down. Fear inhibits. Fear controls. And all of those things inhibit good evolution, positive evolution. So that's how they're connected. And all those things where you tear down, that's more entropy. That's high entropy. More confusion, more chaos, no trust. So you can't have trust. Trust is a low entropy thing. Lack of trust is a high entropy thing. So that's how they're connected, and it all goes together. So that comes to the conclusion then that working toward love, growing toward love, is growing toward low entropy, is growing toward an appreciation and caring for others. So that's how we evolve, is growing toward love.
It's a more productive state, and this is what the higher consciousness system is evolving, hoping
Right.
to evolve.
It is the most
towards.
productive state.
Yes.
There is no more productive state as far as relationship with other than love. When you have a group of individuals and their relationships are based on love, that is as productive and as low entropy as you can get. There is, everything then is kind of supportive, as opposed to tearing each other down, warring with each other so that you can have more than they have to have less, that sort of thing. So yes, that's why we evolve toward love. And again, you can't think of these concepts in a singular sense. Our evolution has to do with interaction with other. with relationship. That's core. It's not something that you define for an individual alone. You know, an individual alone can also feel loving. But let's take love maybe another step. But love is not about yourself. The love is about other. So when you grow toward love, you are growing in a way that you care about others. It's not so much about what's good for me, what can I get, and what do I need, and what makes me feel good, as it is, what can I give? How can I help? What will make them feel good? You see, that's the cooperative, low entropy space we're moving toward, as opposed to, what makes me more powerful, what makes me better, what makes me feel better. That is a destructive, low or high entropy, non-cooperative, self-focused view, and that's the direction of de-evolution, if you will. That's where we came from. And then I guess I should ask one more question. Of those two little extreme societies that I described, the one that's very cooperative with each other and the one that's constantly in competition, people trying to beat other people down, people jealous, wars and so on, which one of those sounds more like the one we live in?
Well, there comes the question of compassion, and you say it's about others and showing compassion. Where might be the limitations of helping others? Yes,
there are limitations to help others. You have to, we won't put it that way. It's not that there's limitations to helping others. Well, you can only help others up to this point. There's a limitation in being helpful. In other words, if you try too hard to be helpful, you can actually hurt others. So it's not that it's a limitation in helping, it's a limitation in your approach to helping. And we all know about that. If you help somebody too much, you make them dependent. And pretty soon they can't get by on their own. And then they're locked into your dependency. That then makes it more difficult for them to evolve, makes it more difficult for them to grow. You lock such an entity into being basically perpetual children. They need to be taken care of, no matter how old or big they are. If you don't allow an entity to go out and interact in its own way, make its own life, be its own person, make its own mistakes, get its own feedback, suffer the consequences of its own decisions, then basically you're making it very hard for that entity to grow up because you keep taking care of it like it's a child. You see, and that's true in any sense. I say child, but that doesn't limit this to young people. If there's a group of people, we learned this some in our application of welfare in the past 50 years. We learned that you can create a whole welfare society that are kind of kept, don't progress, and these families would go, generation after generation. You kind of create this problem where you're really trapping these people into perpetual childhood because they're not going out and dealing and interacting and growing and learning and becoming self-sufficient, and that's not good. So you have to look at how can you help someone. Well, let's say you have lots and lots of money. So you just say, well, I'll give you $5 or $10 million. You're a poor person and you need a break, so here's $10 million. Does that help them? Well, if you look at people who've won lotteries and track, what happens to those people, you find out that no, it doesn't really help them very much. Matter of fact, it creates scads of problems they didn't have before, and they go from simple problems to solve to very complex problems to solve. Life gets more difficult from the big picture perspective because that's not what they needed. It's not that they needed somebody to hand them a bunch of money. What they needed is to help them do for themselves. It's like the old saying about you can give a man a fish or you can teach a man to fish. Well, giving him a fish is helpful in the short term if he's hungry. But if you just keep giving him a fish every day, that's not helpful in the long term because that inhibits his ability to do for himself. Whereas if you teach him to fish, then you give him a skill by which he can take care of himself. So it's that sort of thing. Yes, we can be too helpful. We have to make sure we don't smother people with our help. And that's a very difficult thing between parents and children. You want to help your children. Everybody wants to give their children the optimal chance. But you can also overdo that. You can be so helpful to your children that you hurt your children and make it more difficult for them to get along in life. So where do you draw that line? Well, everyone has to draw that line, from their own intuition. You have to get a sense of the big picture. If you always live in the little picture, that line is hard to see. If you can get to the bigger picture and kind of see where things are going and what's important and what's not, then it's a little easier to see.
We are a very short-term society. If you were to say something that would motivate and enlighten people to the long-term effects of love and lowering entropy, what would you tell them?
Well, yes, we are our whole culture is very short-term. And even parts of our culture that you think would know better, like our industry, our government, things that should have long-term view. If you're a CEO of an industry, you ought to be thinking about how can I be profitable in the next decade? What's coming and where can we go? But instead, our industry thinks about how can I push up my profits in this quarter? Because their remuneration comes on a quarterly profit basis, generally. We have everywhere, we're trying to meet the immediate need, grab the immediate dollar, and we're not thinking about where is this taking us? What kind of foundation are we building and where are we going? And we do that not only in our corporate and government lives, but we do that in our personal lives as well. Whatever makes us feel better now is what we tend to do, as opposed to where we need to grow and become, long term. So that's what I mean by saying taking a big picture view rather than a little picture view. The little picture view is all about now and tomorrow, and that just solves our short-term needs. But that's like putting a Band-Aid, on a tumor. It doesn't help much. You can help relieve symptoms, but you aggravate the underlying problem. You aggravate the underlying problem by ignoring it. Doing nothing aggravates the problem. What you need to do is grow up, become love, evolve the quality of your consciousness. Those are big picture ideas. And what's neat is that if you do that, if you grow up in the big picture, suddenly all these little picture things that have been annoying you and you've been trying to deal with, and as soon as you get one dealt with, another one pops up, and as soon as you kind of have that under control, something else pops up, and your whole life just goes on that way. It's this series of crises and series of awful things that you have to deal with one after another, and there's, it's just like there's never that time to just kind of lay back and say everything's fine and everything's terrific, because if you get a day or two of that, you're lucky. If you get a month or two of that, you're really lucky. But most people are on a constant grind of dealing with the next problem. You're waist deep in a swamp, and you're most worried about the biggest, nearest alligator. That's how people go through life. And once you get a bigger picture perspective, start working on the bigger picture things, now you're actually trying to solve fundamental problems instead of trying to solve symptoms of fundamental problems. Instead of putting a Band-Aid, over the tumor, which helps a little bit because it protects it from being bumped, but it's not really what you need to do for a tumor. Instead of that kind of approaching your life with Band-Aid on this problem, Band-Aid on that problem, you actually start solving the problems that are creating those issues. And after you live some with a big picture perspective, suddenly you don't have all those little problems. Suddenly you are in that space where every day and month and week and year is just fun. It's just joy. Things work very well for you. And all these little nagging things that are constantly needing to be solved just go away. So it's much better to solve the problem than it is to try to make the symptom feel better in the short term. But yes, we're very short-term people. Our culture is like that from top to bottom. It's the way we think. It's in almost everything we do. We very seldom ever let our awareness rise up to the point, grow to the point that we can see what's really going on. You know, what's the underlying current here? Why do I have all these problems all the time? You know, why is my life like that? And it doesn't have to be.
Tom, the next question, it's a subject that people are often fascinated with, and I think if you could expand on it, it would be useful to people, and that's the subject of free will. I know you have several pages, maybe 15 pages, dedicated to this subject in your book, My Big Toe, but if you could give us a little more insight here for this interview on free will, I think that would be
I do have a large section in that. I believe it's in book 2, and I think it's in chapter 7 of book 2. And for those of you who might listen to this, all the books are free on Google Books. So you can go to Google Books and look at book 2, and I believe chapter 7, and you'll find a long aside on free will. And if I'm mistaken and it's not chapter 7, well, go look in the index, because that's in there too, and you can find it where it says aside on free will. But yes, free will is always a subject that people are interested in. First, let's define free will. And a lot of people have a very, kind of dysfunctional idea what free will is. Matter of fact, I was having a radio interview some time back, and the interviewer gave me this example, and the interviewer was kind of the mind that free will didn't really exist. Well, at least that's the side she was taking. Who knows? That could have been like a debater taking that side just to see what I would say. So I won't ascribe those thoughts to her, but she was taking that side of the argument. And she says, well, look, let's look at a 3-year-old sitting in the back seat of a car. Mom is driving, and if the 3-year-old has this little plastic steering wheel, you know, hooked to something so that it can pretend that it's driving, right? And in this 3-year-old's mind, you know, it's going down the street and it's driving the car, and it wants to go right at the next intersection to the playground. So it's just happy going down the car steering, it gets to the next intersection, it turns that wheel right, but mom goes left, okay? So then the point was that we, in this life, are like that 3-year-old. We think we're in control. You see, here we are, we're driving our car, we're doing whatever it is we do, going through life, thinking we're in control, and we turn that wheel to the right, but for some reason, life seems to always go left. And the point was that, do we really have free will? You know, because, you know, it seems like we're just on this path that it doesn't follow what our will is, so do we have free will? Well, that concept is basically saying that free will is that you always get whatever you want. That has nothing to do with free will. Free will isn't about getting what you want. Oh, I will something and it didn't happen, therefore I don't have free will. I will that I'm very handsome and have $100 million in the bank, and, you know, well, if that didn't happen, well, I must not have free will, because that's what my free will wants. Free will is not about getting what you want. You see, so that's just not the way it works. And free will is about the freedom to choose, the freedom to make decisions. Now, what decisions? There's lots of different decisions that you make in a day, and I define in my books a thing called decision space. Decision space for an individual, each individual has a decision space. That decision space is just all the decisions that they can make. Not that's possible to make, because there's a lot of decisions that are outside of that space. You know, a person looks at a problem and they say, well, I've got these 3 options. They may be 10 options, but they only see 3 of them, because the rest of them are outside of their awareness. They just don't even believe they exist. Or it's just, you know, like one of your options may be to, you're 18 and one of your options may be to go to college. But you just never see that option because nobody in your family had ever gone to college. You don't have a lot of money, so you just write, oh, I couldn't do that. Well, that's probably not true. You probably could do that. If, you know, you could probably find a way. You could get a scholarship. You could get money. You could go to a community college first and build up a 4.0 average there so that you were very attractive to. There are ways to go there. But people will not see that as an option, say, because of their culture, their background, their expectations. But anyway, just those decisions that they can see, that are available to them, available to them sounds like it's the whole set, but just the set that's within their grasp. That's their decision space. Okay? And a decision space, the size of your decision space basically determines the size of your reality. If you have a little tiny decision space, you have a little tiny reality. You have a big decision space, you have a bigger reality. The bigger picture you have, the bigger your decision space is. So, in any case, let's say that that you have a certain decision space. At any time you get to an issue where you have to make a decision, there are certain possibilities in your mind that you can make. That's your decision space. And you have the free will to decide any of those. You have the free will to decide, where you go, what you do. Now that doesn't mean that you get to do whatever you want. Okay, let's say you're in prison. Well, you do not have the free will to get up and walk out of the prison because the doors are locked and you're in a cell. But you still have other choices to make. That's not in your decision space to walk out the front door. That's been removed from your decision space. But you still have other things in your decision. How you act, how you interact. If somebody is rude to you and steps on your toe and you know it's on purpose, you can decide how you react to that. You can get angry, you can push them back, you can pull your gun and shoot them, you can do all kinds of things that are in your decision space. Or you can act with some compassion and figure, gee, that person must really be up in knots and angry about things to do that. I'll just maybe move out of their way. Or I'll ask them, maybe, what's the problem? So you can react to things any of these ways. Your decision, your choice, and that's your decision space. So your free will is just to decide within your decision space, and you have the freedom to do that.
I don't want to get off the subject too much, but I can see how this could possibly help those with suicidal thoughts. The decision space being probably a smaller, very confined decision space. Can you expand a little bit towards this subject without, taking us too far off the track?
Sure. People who are suicidal tend to have very small realities, a very small decision space. In other words, they get so small that the only option left is death. That's the only thing they can do. There's no other option that's satisfactory. Every other option is worse. You see, and of course, from a bigger perspective, that's not true. I mean, for the I guess the most extreme example, take a teenager, take some 15-year-old whose boyfriend or girlfriend just jilted them. Well, and they become suicidal. Well, everybody knows from a larger perspective is that 15-year-old has all sorts of things in their life, all sorts of possibilities, all sorts of choices, and all sorts of potential. But at that time, you see, they don't see any of it. None of that exists in their mind. Their decision space is so small that all of those possibilities and potentials don't exist. They're not there. The only thing that's there is their hurt, their pain, and every option seems empty and fruitless. So, they become suicidal. There was a question the other day is, how do you deal with that? And that's always something that people like that, well, how do you deal with someone like that? Well, first realize that they have a little tiny reality when they feel this way, for whatever the reason is. And the only way to deal effectively with it is to join them first inside their reality. You have to get to where they are in their reality, and from there, you have to help them see a bigger picture. You have to help them see more possibilities other than the one they see. And if you work only from the outside, I'd say that's working from the inside. You get inside their reality. Start from where they are. Share their pain. Commiserate with them. Let them know that you understand. In other words, join them there in that spot of despair. And then, once you're in there with them, you can help point them to, well, actually, you could do this. Or you could do that, or this other thing's possible. Or, I bet, in a few months you'll probably find another girlfriend. May even be better than this one, There's these other options. But if you try to do that from the outside, they won't pay any attention to you. They'll shut you out. Because what do you know? You're not in this. You're not me. You're not experiencing this like I am. Sure, for you, there's all kinds of things. But for me, and because you're an outsider, they won't listen to much of what you say. They'll discount it. Yeah, that's fine for you. You have potential. You have all these options. I don't. My life's, not worth living. And you're not as effective. So that'd be my advice on how do you help such a person. One, you don't try to tell them what to do and order them about, because that won't help. And two, try to get inside and join them there. Have empathy. Have compassion. Join them. And then try to move them one tiny step at a time. Telling them that they're being foolish isn't helpful for the most part. It's not an intellectual problem. It's an emotional problem, and it's a problem of a shrunk reality. And you have to deal with it on an emotional level from inside that shrunk reality. But yes, that's a decisions-based problem. So your free will, backing up to the free will question, your free will is the freedom to make decisions within your decision space. And that's all it is. Now, there may only be, your decision space for a particular decision, you may think only has one choice. Well, that's not free will. I don't have any choice there. There's just one choice. It almost always has more than one choice. You may think that it just has one choice that's good and the rest of the choices are poor, and therefore it only has one choice, but that's almost never true. There's multiple choices. And the way you label this one as good and other ones as poor has more to do with your beliefs, your fears, your lack of information, or even the information you have. Some of those choices that look poor may turn out to be much better than the one that you think is the only one that's valuable. But you have other choices. And you always have the choice, to not make that choice now. That's another choice. You don't have to make the choice now. But we have more choices than we know. And we have the freedom to make whatever choices we know about. But free will is a logical necessity for the existence of consciousness. Consciousness and free will are logically necessary for each other. You cannot have consciousness without free will. You cannot have free will without consciousness. So if you think you're conscious and that you have consciousness, then you must have free will. Because a consciousness without free will, it doesn't really exist. There's no choice. That's what consciousness does. Consciousness is aware, and it chooses. It interacts. And interaction is a choice. That's the nature of consciousness. With no free will, then basically we don't have a consciousness, we just have a script. It's the movie that plays, and you're a character in the movie, and you don't have a choice of whether you cry in this scene and smile in the next. You do whatever the director has written in the script. You're just following a script. No consciousness, no free will. You see, nobody in that movie has consciousness. They're just following a script. So consciousness and free will go together. So given that we all think we are conscious and have consciousness, then we have to then logically say we all have free will and are able to make these choices.
And other questions that come up are concerning my big toe illuminates the fact of this reality is information-based. We are dealing with data. We ourselves are data. We receive this information. The way that we receive this information in the form of premonitions, messages from relatives, things like that. The data and the source of the data, is the source important? And could you expand on that a bit?
Sure. First, let's get it straight that the data and the source of the data are two entirely different things. Often we confuse the two. We think that the data is, the source of the data. I get this question a lot from people who You know, they go into an altered state of consciousness, or they have a near-death experience or some sort of thing like that, and they meet Uncle Fred. And then they'll ask me, was that really Uncle Fred? Well, the problem with that question is that it's sort of the wrong question. It's really a meaningless question. It doesn't matter, you see, because they're saying, well, what was the source of the data? Well, yeah, I got the data. The data said Uncle Fred. You know, act like Uncle Fred, smelled like Uncle Fred, talked like Uncle Fred, knew what Uncle Fred knew, but was that really Uncle Fred? You see, there's no difference there. If it was Uncle Fred, you know, they say, you know, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, you know, it is a duck. You know, well, yes, that was Uncle Fred. And this question, was it really Uncle Fred? It's, well, what's the source? We never get the source. The source is never something that's available to us in the larger consciousness system. When you're in an out-of-body state or a lucid dream or just normal dreaming, you get data. Here, in this virtual reality that we call our physical reality, we interchange data all the time. This reality is a virtual reality. It's informational reality. It's based on information. Okay, that's what we mean by data. We're really talking about information. So everything we get and give is information. Okay, now we look at each other because in this reality we interact with each other as individual pieces. Okay, you talk to me and I say, you're the source of the data. Okay, when you're in the larger reality, it's not quite so clear because the rule set there isn't that buttoned down. It isn't that tight. It constrains us to this individual entity thing. Basically, all we are is consciousness exchanging data. Different individuated units of consciousness, and we're exchanging data. Yes.
I think where the concerns come in for some people who have these abilities to receive these messages is when there's some fear associated with what is the source and can I trust it. I think using their intuition might be the best way. What do you say to how to trust the information they're getting?
First, let's get through the point that you cannot know the source. That's not what you communicate with. The source is not the data. You're getting information, and that information is Uncle Fred or whatever, a monster, you know, something, you know, that's the way you interpret it. You get the data, and when you interpret it, your interpretation has to do with your own beliefs, fears, your experience, you know, your knowledge and lack thereof. So you get data, you interpret it. The source is unknown. Live with that. It's like we have to learn to live with uncertainty. So you just come to the realization that it doesn't matter what the source is. What matters is how you interact with it. Was that a good interaction with Uncle Fred? Did you learn from it? Did it connect with you? Did it solve your problems? You know, was it healing? Was it informational? Was it fun? Or, you know, did it terrorize you? You know, did it hurt? Did it make things more difficult? So you have to decide whether that information is valuable or not valuable. Now, think of it logically. If you decide that information was valuable, it was really valuable information, this connection here with Uncle Fred, then I tell you, well, that really was your Uncle Fred, or I say, well, that really wasn't Uncle Fred, that was just somebody pretending to be Uncle Fred. Does it make any difference? You see? If it's valuable, it's valuable. If it's not valuable and you just can't use it and it makes it harder for you to evolve your consciousness, does it matter whether that was the real Uncle Fred or not? It doesn't matter. You as an individual have to have the competency to look at the data, use what you can, and live gracefully with uncertainty. You may not be using the data correctly. You know, you may turn that data away and say, I can't use it, when actually you could have used it, but you just didn't know how. But that's all right. You have to choose how you are, whoever you are, right now when you get the data, you have to decide, can I use it or not? If you can use it, use it. If you can't, let it go. The source is irrelevant. It's because we have this issue of trust And the issue of trust, as you say, is connected to the issue of fear. And we want to know if this being says something to us, can we trust it? Is it the truth? Can I believe it? You see, now here it is. We want to know, should we believe it or not? Well, you see, belief is not the answer. It's not whether you can believe it or not isn't the point. The point is, what can you do with it? Whether you believe it or not is really irrelevant. Believing or not believing is actually the problem. That locks you into something. Because then somebody will say, well, yeah, that was really the real Uncle Fred, and then you believe it. Well, if that information isn't good for you, if it hurts you, if it causes you problems, now you have to struggle with the fact that the real Uncle Fred is telling you stuff that, gives you problems. You see, the belief or the disbelief becomes the problem itself. A belief is a constraint. It doesn't enable you to see any further but what the belief is. You can't see bigger pictures through belief. Belief will never give you a bigger picture. It only gives you a constrained picture to the belief itself. So we want to avoid beliefs. And the can I believe it or not, you see, is the wrong question. If you believe it, that's not good for you. If you don't believe it, that's not good for you. Let the belief go. What can you do with it? So many people get wrapped up around, can I trust it? Should I believe it? And we tend to do that in our life all the time. Anytime we get new information, the first thing we say is, can we believe it or not? It's a matter of belief. And then if it's a matter of belief, we have to rely on somebody else to tell us. Oh, we go to the expert. Oh, Dr. So-and-so with your PhD, can we believe it? And they say, oh yeah, that's it. Then we believe it. You see, or they say no, and then we don't believe it. So we rely on someone else to tell us what to believe and what not to believe. Well, that puts us in the position of children, doesn't it? And most of us live our lives as children in the larger reality. We tend to be children. We go from thing to thing, hoping somebody else will tell us what's true and what's not, what we can believe and what we don't. We get the news. Can we believe it? And it's all about belief. And then some people will have more credibility. Oh, well, listen to whatever so-and-so says because you can believe that. You see, belief is the problem. Anytime you say, well, you can believe what so-and-so says, then so-and-so can give you a bunch of nonsense and you'll believe it anyway because you're limited yourself to believing. You see, that's the downside. So if you want to act like an adult and be an adult, kind of in the larger reality, you have to let belief go. Not be the child and expect somebody to tell you what to believe or not to believe. Not even try to figure out, can you believe it or not? Because if you have to ask that question, you obviously don't have enough information to come up with an answer. If you had enough information to come up, with a certain answer, you wouldn't have to ask the question. Should I believe it? The very concept of wanting a belief or not means that you don't know. You don't have enough information, but you're thinking that somebody else does have more information than you, and you want them to tell you what it is you should or should not believe. So you're in a position of a child. A child doesn't know much. A child has very, very limited information, so they depend on mom and dad to tell them what's right. And you go your whole life that way, and it's not helpful. You need to let that go.
From your perspective, from a bigger picture, what is going on when we see children suffer? That seems to be a very difficult thing to deal with, how children are starving in various countries or the tragedies that they go through, the afflictions they have. What is happening here in a larger perspective?
Okay, well, there's a few angles we'll have to talk about here. One is our perspective of suffering and how awful it is. Okay, from a bigger picture, our purpose here isn't to be happy and have parties and feel good. That's not the point of being here. It's not optimizing good feelings. It's learning, growing. Because we recycle ourselves from experience to experience. One of my books I call experience packets. We come here, we have an experience packet, a lifetime, if you will, and we come back and have another experience packet. The concept of death then kind of disappears. There's no death. You just go from life packet to life packet. So if you're in a terrible situation that causes death, from the little picture, that's awful. That's horrible. From the bigger picture, you're moving from packet to packet, and it's no more horrible than it is when you're playing a video game and your character dies. Well, they pop back up in a graveyard and you run back out on the field and you do it again, right? You'll learn more and get better at whatever you're trying to do. So if you look at that perspective, then it kind of takes the sting out of death. Death is not the horrible, awful end to something. Death is just a transition to a different experience. That's one problem with the view. There's another problem with the view, and that is, I get often somebody will say, well, if we're in this larger consciousness system, and this larger consciousness system has built this reality, then why would this larger conscious system have children dying of starvation and why does a lot of this horrible stuff goes on? Serial killers and why doesn't it step in and fix all that stuff? Why does it let that happen? Well, the error there is that we have free will. There is no larger conscious system, playing with its pet people, moving everything around. Oh no, it let its pet people, have this terrible experience. It let the little child die over here. How could it do that? Well, it's not playing with its pet people. This is not a big game and it's moving the pieces around and oh no, it let its child die. We're here to learn and grow. We interact. There is not a overall plan, scheme, idea that moves all the pieces around on the board and wants to keep them all happy and safe all the time. You see, that's the wrong concept. It's not like that. We are not living scripted lives. What the underlying assumption is there, well, if we're living scripted lives and a larger conscious system is generating all of us and all of our lives and all of our experience, then how come it generates this awful experience? Well, the larger system is not scripting all of our lives and all of our, that's back to there is no free will. You see, that's back to a scripted deterministic existence. We don't have that. We have opportunity. We make choices. What we have is free will and an array of choices. Okay, now there are some places that seem like they're awful places to be. I remember 20 years ago that there was starvation in Biafra. And I don't know if there is that now. Biafra's a little country in the northeastern coast of Africa, I believe. And maybe not. Anyway, there was a lot of starvation there. Why would anyone incarnate or pick up a life packet as a child in Biafra? What would that have to offer? There's obviously nothing there. Well, that's not true. There's nothing there if what you think is that life is about being happy and feeling good and that sort of thing. Then there doesn't seem to be anything there. But that's not what life's about. Did those children in Biafra have love in their life? Did their mother care about them? Did their grandparents care about them? Did their siblings? Did other people? Did they hang together? Did they have tight-knit, personal, loving communities? Maybe they only lived to an average age of 12 years old before starvation or disease or something killed them. But what was the experience within that? Okay? If you're a fish and you're in water, you don't really experience the water as water. It's just your environment. If you're a child in Biafra, you're not standing on the out saying, oh, how awful, I'm starving and hungry and there's disease all around. That's just your water. That's just your life. That's the way reality is for you. It's not something that's particularly horrible. It's just the circumstances that exist. And if you have a loving connections within there, then that may be a perfectly wonderful place for an entity who's just getting started in incarnations into physical matter reality to go in for a short visit, 10, 12 years, that's enough. Just get their feet wet and experience very close personal relationships and how to deal gracefully with adversity and disease and death. And I suspect you go into a society where death is all around you, it's probably death isn't so big a deal. Death is the bigger deal when death is the exception. When everybody lives to be 120, death at 90 gets to be horrible. When everybody's in a society where death at 35 is normal, like it was, maybe 1,000 years ago, then, death at 80 doesn't seem like such a horrible idea. That seems like, a magnificent accomplishment. It's all relative to your perspective. So we take our perspective and our lifestyle. Here we are over in the West, and we eat well and we eat too much and we have everything and we're comfortable and we like it. And we look at those sports-starving children and say, oh, how awful. Well, we're putting our own circumstances, our own mindset, our own reality, our own set of values into that situation and finding it awful. If we were suddenly put there, we'd find it awful. If we were born there, particularly if there were, a lot of love going around, we might even find it better than where we were. We may even turn all those conveniences, that TV and new car, in for that kind of a relationship because we wouldn't see it as awful. It's just the way it is. Life is tough. You're hungry most of the time. There's nothing special about that, That's just the way life is. There's no sense getting upset or feeling bad about that. So we just have to look at it a little differently. For one, the reality is not scripted. That's determinism. There's no free will in that. Okay? Two, there's a lot of randomness going by in the world. Things happen just because they happen. How could the larger conscious system allow, my mother to get cancer? Why? That's so unfair. She's such a nice person. Well, things happen. Our job here isn't, again, to be happy and feel good. It's to learn. It's to grow up. It's to deal with difficult things. Make the good choices. Move toward love and caring. That's what we're here for. It's not how could they let that happen. Well, nobody's in charge of making your life good. Nobody's in charge of making you happy. That's not somebody's job. That's not the larger conscious system's job. Stuff just happens. It happens because, this happened to that, and maybe she got cancer because she was in a building in her youth back before they knew that asbestos, caused cancer, and maybe that's why, she got that cancer, because stuff happens. We're exposed to things, we do things, we catch bugs, we get viruses. We smoked cigarettes back in the 1920s when it was a healthy thing to do. Nobody knew any better, except perhaps for the cigarette companies, but they weren't talking. So, we do what we do. Kids go to rock concerts, and then when they're 40 years old, they can't hear anything. Huh? What'd you say? I didn't get that. Well, that's life, Well, how could the conscious system let that happen? Well, you make your choices, you do what you do. Things happen, you live in a reality, you deal with it. That's what life's all about. So there's nothing out there whose responsibility is to make you happy or to take care of all the children on the planet. That's not the way it works. We're here to interact, to experience, to be challenged, and to deal with it. And that's what we get, is opportunity to deal with things in a way that we evolve the quality of our consciousness. And that's what it's all about.
You mentioned that this isn't a scripted life, although for some people, certain events and certain interactions and certain events are perhaps planned before. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, when I say that our life is not scripted, that doesn't mean there can't be little bits and pieces of it that are scripted. And by scripted, again, it doesn't mean you don't have free will. It just means that there's a higher probability, if you make the right choices, that you will end up in a certain situation. For an example, my lovely wife Pamela, I was told about her when she was 2 years old and I was 14, and that I wouldn't meet her until I was 35. Well, it's not that was scripted so much as that was part of a plan. And it's not that I didn't have free will and I couldn't have avoided that. I could have messed that all up if I wanted to. It's just that I was being also nudged along the way to make that happen. So when it came to a decision of where to live next, the place where she was just happened to pop into my mind and seemed like a really good idea. You see, so that's what I call about nudging, you know. It's not like, well, I have to go there because my woman awaits me, you know. There wasn't any of that. It was like, well, gee, they have a good university there, and that. Maybe I should go over there. And I call them up, and gee, they were just really friendly, and they just really wanted me to come there, you know, and so it just worked. Well, that's being nudged, okay? So it did work out that way, not because it was scripted and there was no free will, but because it was probable. It was kind of set up ahead of time before the incarnation as a connection for reasons of its own, things that, you know, would be helpful to me, things would be helpful to her, and whatever else, past histories. And then it was nudged from both sides until it happened. So what it was a likelihood, a probability. But at any one time, I could have said, no, I don't want to go to that state, you know. I want to go someplace else. Well, that would have been maybe the end of that probability. Suddenly that probability would go from a 0.9 down to maybe a 0.6. And maybe I could make another decision to pop me back over there, you see, and then it would maybe go up a little bit. So based on the decisions I made, that probability would go up and down. But probabilities can be nudged a little too, if you make poor decisions perhaps, or decisions that aren't in your own best interest.
There might have been.
So it's not being scripted, but are we being helped? Do we get just the right information just in time? You know, is there synchronicity that just delivers us what we need as we need it? Sure. But that doesn't mean that life is scripted. What that means is that it's interactive. We are interactive with the larger consciousness system. The larger consciousness system does want us to succeed, but it just provides opportunity, and we have to grab the opportunity and make something of it. We still have free will.
You might have had 2 or 3 or 4 opportunities to meet Pamela.
Yes, in that way. Had I muffed one of them up, you know, and created a problem, it may have, you know, had to bounce some other way. And it may have never happened if both of us didn't kind of move to that direction. But it was a resonance that was set up.
Interesting.
Okay, does that get up through all your questions?
That was fantastic.
Been through all of it?
Did you listen? Yeah, that was fantastic stuff.